The following events are fictional, and the series is inspired by Gotham by Gaslight, a title by DC Comics. Batman and the characters used in the film are trademarked for DC Comics, but the following images may be disturbing to certain age groups. Viewer discretion is advised. The Gilded Age in America was one of mystery, industry and glamour. But underneath all that was dirt, grime and corruption. Gotham City was no exception. Founded in 1865 by Captain John Logerquist as a settlement, Gotham quickly made a name for itself in the fur trade. It quickly grew until British occupation in the early 1700s and then the Revolutionary War in 1776. There were many men and women of historical notoriety in the war, notably among them Mad Anthony Wayne. He had earned his nickname for his angry temperament, infamous for punishing the men serving under him severely, and also for his fierce assaults against the British military forces. Anthony Wayne was known for many acts, but not all of them were honourable. He is considered to be one of the people responsible for the start of a long history of aggression, violence and discrimination towards the Native American populace. He amassed himself enough wealth and societal standing to pass down for his family. Long after his military career, some of his descendants set out and a few settled in Gotham. The Wayne family in Gotham quickly used their popularity and accumulated wealth to found Wayne Industrial Co. on the cusp of the 1820s. Along with the Copperpot and Sionis families, the Waynes helped launch Gotham in the American Industrial Revolution. This effectively put the families at the head of the economy in Gotham. Gotham began to thrive as the 1830s arrived, and so did the latest member of the Wayne family, Thomas. Thomas eventually met his wife, Martha Arkham, as he neared young adulthood, and the two became married. They were determined to forge the path of the Wayne family behind them, and lead Wayne Industrial Co. in a different direction, one for the betterment and the inclusion of the people. One step that Thomas took was hiring a young man, Lucius Fox, as his head of chief foreman. It was a highly controversial move as Lucius was a black man, and tensions were high between northern and southern states. But Lucius overcame this obstacle, performing above and beyond for Wayne Industrial Co. Thomas and Lucius became fast friends. The future was looking bright. Then came the American Civil War in 1861. In April of 1861, Thomas and Martha conceived a child unbeknownst to them. As the Civil War conflict began, Thomas left Gotham to fight for the northern states alongside his best friend, Jacob Packer. Utilising their training as surgeons, they became field medics for the Union. Soon after, Martha began to notice the subtle changes. She was pregnant. In January of 1862, she gave birth to their son, Bruce Thomas Wayne. Thomas was, against all odds in January of 1862, allowed a brief moment of leave once word of his son was born. It was a joyous occasion for both Thomas and Martha in the midst of such a bloody conflict, but left Thomas's friend, Jacob, a bit spiteful towards him. Though Thomas had to return to the war, the Waynes brought into the employ of one Alfred Pennyworth, a young actor and former veteran from England. Thomas had met him at a boxing match some years prior where the two had gone head-to-head, concluding with a draw. Thomas wanted a butler to aid Martha in the raising of his young son. With the end of the American Civil War in 1865, Thomas returned home, disillusioned by the horrors he had seen on the battlefield. As the years progressed, he poured himself into his work as a surgeon. He pioneered new techniques, having seen many amputations and botched medical procedures on the battlefield. Thomas left the handling of the family company to more interested parties while still remaining the owner. Bruce grew into a healthy young boy, cherishing his parents like none other. His parents loved him with all their hearts and he loved them with all of his. When the young boy was 10, one tragic event changed all that. After attending a performance at the Gotham Opera House, Thomas, Martha and Bruce were riding home in their stagecoach. During the journey back to the Wayne estate, their coach was held up on one of the back roads. A man, cloaked in shadow, coerced them out of the vehicle. Thomas, being a former military man, tried to stop the bandit but was shot, soon followed by Martha. Bruce could only watch in horror as his life crumbled towards him. The criminal next turned his guns on the young boy, but was stopped when a colony of bats was startled out of the surrounding trees. The shadowy man fled in terror, leaving the young boy with his dead parents. It was once the police became involved that a young Bruce met James Gordon, a rookie police officer new to Gotham. The young policeman and former Civil War veteran comforted Bruce and assured him in the midst of his shocking horror. This tragedy scarred the boy for life. He was left in the care of Alfred and a nun and family friend of the Waynes named Sister Leslie Tompkins. Bruce spent much of his childhood at St. Caldwell's, that the orphanage Sister Leslie ran. It became like a second home to him. He had few friends among the other orphans, except for a young girl named Selina Kyle. As Bruce grew into young adulthood, he left the sanctuary of St. Caldwell's. He had grown accustomed to hiding his anger, masking his pain, and appearing composed, but underneath he was enraged at his parents' murder. He saw the crime and corruption everywhere, the child labour in factories, the corrupt police force, and the petty crime that had become a part of Gotham's culture. He began to lose hope. One night, after a particularly intense depressive episode, he stumbled to his parents' grave. There he vowed he would wage war on crime and corruption seeded in Gotham City. But in order to do this, he knew he needed to be more than just a rich aristocrat. More than just a man. In 1879, at the age of 17, Bruce left Gotham to travel worldwide. Upon leaving Gotham in 1871, Bruce first went to Europe. He sought out masters of crafts that he hoped would prove valuable in his crusade against crime. His quest was an attempt to prevent his tragedy, the loss of his parents, from happening to anyone else. Upon arriving in Europe, Bruce Wayne met with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Doyle pointed him to his associate, Joseph Bell. He was a Scottish surgeon and emphasised the importance of observation and deduction in a medical diagnosis. Bruce learnt from these two experts that no detail should be left unobserved, no stone unturned in an investigation. He also trained in escapology or escape artistry with a young Harry Houdini before his career. He considered this necessary should he ever find himself in a tight spot. He trained with many combat experts as well. One of his most trusted mentors was Theodore Wildcat Grant, a British boxer known for his ferocity in the ring. Grant took to his name and wore a mask crafted to make him look the part. Bruce's travels took him to all parts of the world as well as East and West Asia. With each stop, he learned more about psychology, forensic science, and combat, both unarmed and armed. One thing that fascinated him in his travels was the work of Carl Benz and Siegfried Marcus. During the time he was away from Gotham, Bruce would train under some of the most accomplished men in history. Bruce's final stop in his training was with Sigmund Freud, who taught him psychology. Though Bruce learnt valuable information, he disagreed with Freud on numerous accounts, even proposing his own theories once he'd learned enough. Freud was insulted by his students' questioning and cut off their training early, though Bruce had intended to leave not long after, regardless. Bruce Wayne's journal recounts his time with Freud as informative yet stagnant. Bruce considered Freud a stubborn and abrasive mentor. Bruce returned to Gotham in 1891, his heart set on returning to his homeland. He was met with Alfred Pennyworth, who was overjoyed to see him. Bruce knew that Alfred had worried about him, but he was also happy to see the man who had taken the fatherly role in his life. The young Wayne wasted no time after getting settled. He formulated a plan of action. Having encountered numerous cultures, Bruce was fascinated with the symbolism of the bat. In Celtic folklore, they were a symbol of courage and hope, while in the West, they were symbols of fear, vampires and harbingers of death. He knew that criminals and people in general were superstitious. The tales he'd heard of spring-heeled Jack, pig-headed women, and such other yarns had shown him this. He crafted a suit using a bulletproof vest, a mask similar to Theodore Grant's, and other tools and instruments. The result was something that he was sure would strike terror into the hearts of criminals in Gotham. Donning this suit, Bruce became something otherworldly, something terrifying. He became the Batman. He attempted to construct his own gasoline-powered vehicle, but he could not complete it entirely. He would revisit that project constantly. He set out on his war on crime almost immediately. He took on Basil Carlo, the disgruntled stage actor, and Mr. Freeze, the tragic scientist who had been wronged by his employer. Apart from these cases, however, the Batman wanted to find out who had been responsible behind his parents' murder. Now an adult, Bruce could see just how much more Gotham had sunk into its own filth. Street gangs ran rampant, and pickpocket gangs operated unopposed. Worse than that, corrupt city officials made money off the plight of Gotham citizens. The Bat set to work, identifying who would have killed his parents. He wanted to believe, even above reason, that there had been some plot devised. He found himself continually frustrated by the lack of evidence. The Batman kept his ear to the ground, and eventually he began to hear whispers of a lonely alcoholic bragging about his career as a highway robber in a local bar. Going to the bar, the unlucky Bat confronted the man in an alleyway. This man was Joseph Chilton. Chilton was terrified to be confronted by such a fearsome creature. The Batman had been considered nothing but a rumour by most, despite his involvement in the apprehension of Clayface and Mr. Freeze. No one had seen the Batman other than the two criminals. Upon interrogation, Bruce discovered that this man was trying to make money for liquor. He killed the Waynes out of desperation. Rage filled the Batman and he pulled off his cowl, revealing his identity to the terrified man. This could have nearly ended the Batman's career before it had even gained notoriety. But Bruce didn't care. Regardless, Chilton became overcome with fear and confusion, tripping backwards over a railing and falling to his death on the streets below the alleyway. This shocked Bruce. He thought he would feel gratified by the death of his parents' murderer, but he just felt remorse and anguish. He left the scene and returned to his loft in the city. Having resolved his parents' murder, Bruce was ready to hang up the cape and cowl. Alfred was relieved to see this. He had just gotten his adopted son back and did not wish to lose him again. Despite this brief respite, the murders in Gotham began. At first, they were unnoticed. A woman walking home there, and a woman outside a pub there. Bruce didn't notice until his childhood friend Selina Kyle brought it to his attention. Eventually, the murders continued to the point where even the police couldn't ignore it. Bruce donned the mask again, investigating the murders, and then the first letter arrived, signed Jack the Ripper. The following weeks and months would be as if hell itself had raved. The Batman would have to face the ugliness within himself in order to stop the horrors that the reign of the Ripper would unleash upon Gotham. The city would watch on in terror as the Batman would never be the same again.
Today assumes the office of Amadeus Arkham, and with the funding and resources necessary to further my own research. How unfortunate that my ascent came at the cost of his sanity. But perhaps now this Untermensch will actually be put to use instead of wasting resources and further perpetuating their existence.
Arkham Asylum. The asylum opened up its doors in Gotham City near Jersey in 1879. The asylum's founder, Amadeus Arkham, was inspired by the trending construction of asylums in New England throughout the 1870s. He himself was from Danvers, Massachusetts, which had opened its own asylum just a year prior. In 1878, his brother Jeremiah also moved there, along with Jeremiah's wife Helen and daughter Martha. Martha Arkham would eventually go on to marry Thomas Wayne years later. For the building's construction, Amadeus was inspired by the floor plans developed by Thomas Story Kirkbride in the 1840s. Known as the Kirkbride plans, Amadeus was familiar with this style of building from his time in Essex County, which was popular among the hospitals he had worked at. Being an orderly who witnessed firsthand the abuse and malpractice against the patients, he became disgruntled and vowed to invest his earnings in his own hospital, which would treat its patients humanely and with the modern medical practice, not crucifixion therapies or exorcisms. Throughout the years, Arkham Asylum has held some of the most infamous and bizarre criminals in Gotham's history in the confines of the stone walls. One of the first patients to be incarcerated at the asylum was Victor Zaz, a man who went on a mercy killing spree after experiencing an existential crisis. Victor had a mundane job as a tax collector, collecting debts for the city government. He would go knocking on doors, regretfully informing people of the money that they owed. It was his job that Victor felt bad for having. He would catch brief glimpses into their lives and those he visited, being able to see over their shoulder at the stack of bills on a desk, or a couple of starving kids or thickly wheelchair-bound spouse. These people's lives were broken and all Victor did was worse than their circumstances. That was his whole job description, squeezing money out of people going through hard times. Ironically, Victor often owed money to others himself due to his severe gambling addiction. Supposedly at the lowest point in his life, Victor stumbled across the philosophies of solipsism and nihilism. It's unsure how exactly he was introduced to these subject matters, but according to his interrogation, once he discovered them, he was never the same again. He felt a veil had been lifted and he could finally see things clearly for the first time. Everyone else was a zombie, a mindless philosophical zombie, empty and hollow, but all the characteristics of a live, functioning human being. Victor, with this newfound revolution, went on a killing spree, stabbing the poor, unfortunates of society, the homeless, the sick, the starving, the elderly, the poor. For each one he carved a tally mark into his flesh. After being caught by police, he stated that the killings were all mercy killings, as he was not forcing them to die, but was instead freeing them from being forced to live. He argued in court that anyone would forfeit existence upon someone was worse than the murderer. The lunatic's existential ranting was all the judge and jury needed to hear, and he was sent to Arkham Asylum. In 1886, Arkham became friends with Garfield Linz, a pyrotechnic arsonist who was responsible for starting several forest fires. But more notoriously, he would lure local women and set them on fire while they were chained to a bed. Neighbours suspected him to be responsible for fires when they noticed he always reeked of smoke and ash and had several burn marks across his hands and fingers. It would later be revealed that those marks were self-inflicted, as Linz was so fascinated by fire. He burned down several buildings that were previously ruled out as accidental gaslight lightings. He also described in great detail the arousal he felt from inhaling the smoke and the bright embers that danced around him like fireflies. It supposedly started in his childhood when he would entertain himself by lighting a lantern, blowing it out, and then relighting it. He claimed his crimes were his attempt at replicating the excitement he felt. The Civil War had ended in 1865, but its impact had still been left on the minds of soldiers. Some more so than others, in particular cavalryman Mortimer Drake and Union soldier Philip Reardon. Both incarcerated in 1879, Drake joined the Union in 1863 at the age of 21. He was inspired by the campaigns of George Armstrong Custer, whom Drake modelled his own eccentric, flamboyant personality on. This was both his most charming and most ostracising feature, as it put off many of his cavalrymen. Many accused him of being a homosexual and making advances on others, pushing for his discharge. However, none of these accusations were proven. Drake remained as part of the crew for the remaining 2 years of the war, having had a strange mental breakdown near the end of the war. In his spare time at the camp, Drake would read adventure novels and swashbuckling novels, often trying to recreate the dynamic poses depicted in the writings. His favourite book was The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. He practised his lunging and his sword shouting "en garde" at others. He also began altering his speech to sound more formal. One day he challenged a taunting soldier to a sword duel. The taunter, not realising the furtherance of Drake's request, took him up on the challenge. Drake lethally stabbed the man by jamming his sword into his chest, and then when others tried to overpower him, he began fighting them as well. The cavalryman general came to investigate the camp and found Mortimer dancing with his sword in his hand in a circle of bodies around him. He was arrested and sent to Blackgate, where he would stay until being transferred to Arkham Asylum upon its completion. Reardon's story was a similar one. Reardon was becoming paranoid that others were plotting to stab him in the back from behind, where he did not see them coming. So in Reardon's mind, the only rational thing to do was kill them before they could kill him. He shot them all in his sleep and then ran off of the camp and into the woods, where he hid for days until some Union soldiers found him. He was starved and dehydrated, foaming at the mouth and babbling out how he could see everything. After being sent to Blackgate and then transferred to Arkham along with Drake, his vision started to deteriorate. This caught the attention of Dr. Hugo Strange, who was looking for a patient with poor eyesight to use for experimentation purposes. The specifics of these experiments were never revealed until historians unearthed the notes and journal entries of Hugo Strange several years later. Warning, the following material may be disturbing to some viewers. In 1888, Strange started projects to enhance the senses of human beings. He planned to cover all 5, but never got through the first, dealing with sight. He started on a smaller scale, initially planning to develop an experimental treatment cure for colourblindness. For this, he used a psych patient named Paul Decker, a crackpot artist who suffered from Stendhal syndrome, a disorder which inspired him to start stealing art pieces and destroying them. Decker seemed to make progress mentally while undergoing therapy with Dr. Arkham, but was also progressively becoming colourblind, which made him depressed. Strange offered to give him any early release from the hospital in exchange if Decker allowed himself to be tested on. Decker agreed, and so the experiments began. According to the notes, the experiments involved inserting coloured lenses into the end of a device and beaming a laser from the other end into the patient's eyes, essentially converting that what would be colourblind glass lenses in modern day into a laser beam wrapped into the eyes of the subject. Decker was released to a halfway house and asked to document his symptoms. It initially seemed promising, however over time Decker's eyesight started to become oversaturated. Decker also complained about having been too bright and disorienting. Even when closing his eyelids, he said he couldn't stop seeing bright colours. Then he started to go on a psychotic rambling about how he could be able to see colours that didn't exist within this universe. Things came to a head when he brutally murdered an orderly who came to check up on him and then knitted a crazy quilt out of his skin, which he wore around his otherwise naked body. After coming upon the gruesome fight, Arkham sent him back to the asylum. Amadeus could not understand how Decker had gone from making so much progress to quickly becoming a psychotic maniac. Arkham was kept unaware of the specifics of Hugo's experimentation. For Strange's next attempt at vision manipulation, he selected Philip Reardon, but this experiment was much more ambitious as it dabbled in trying to bridge the gap between the scientific and supernatural. The aim of this experiment was to restore Reardon's vision to his fingertips, allowing him to possess a dermo-optical perception and 360-degree vision. It started with blindfolding Reardon and trying to apply a braille to colour perception. They would lay out coloured pieces of paper on the table for him to feel with his fingertips and get him to memorise the different feels of the colours. He could recognise the darkness of colours due to the fact that they involved more heat and energy and warmer than light colours. He could also recognise the difference between him and another object from the vibrations and how his voice echoed around him. Hugo unfortunately failed at transmitting optic nerves to the fingers and cancelled the project. However, Reardon remained mentally affected. He began having the delusion that he could actually see through his fingertips and that his eyes were unnecessary, so he promptly gouged them out. He was treated in the medical unit where he insisted to the doctors that he could still see everything around him. He developed a new neurological condition as Anton Babinski syndrome, or prisoner's light show phenomenon. It occurs in people who are either blind or stuck in a dark room, and the brain, to make up for the lack of imagery, projects its own vision of the external world within their mind. Throughout the years, the asylum would continue to holding place for several odd and unique characters, coming and going like revolving door, and also being the location where several morbid and harrowing occurrences took place, such as the shocking murder of Martin Mad Dog Hawkins by Dr. Amadeus Arkham, the riot of 1889, the experiments of Hugo Strange, and the Arkham protest, a protest by mental health reform advocates to take the treatment more humane. Unfortunately, in the end, Amadeus' asylum became the living hell that he fought to avoid it from becoming. Harvey Dent. Born to Richard and Laura Dent, Harvey was a well-behaved boy. His father was Gotham's county prosecutor and a part of high society. The Dents had many connections and one such friendship with that of the Waynes. Thomas and Martha's son, Bruce, was around Harvey's age, and the two became friends. One of Harvey's trademarks was his coin. He would flip it to make trivial decisions sometimes. Bruce always thought it humorous, and they would often make up games based around the flipping of Harvey's coin. Harvey kept that coin throughout his life. Although the Dents were upstanding citizens from the public standpoint, Richard Dent was constantly plagued by the stress and paranoia that came with his job. He turned to the drink more often than not, often coming home in a drunken stupor. Sometimes his drinking would lead to beatings heaped upon Harvey. This impacted the boy deeply. Eventually, his father passed away from a heart attack. This happened soon after the death of the Waynes at the hand of a stagecoach bandit. Bruce and Harvey relied heavily on each other in their friendship. They shared the loss that brought them together, but with one major difference. Bruce was enraged at the man who killed his parents, whilst Harvey's rage was directed at his late father. As the years passed, Harvey's anger festered and turned bitter inside. He accomplished much, studying law and politics, eventually being groomed to take on the position of county prosecutor like his father. With Bruce's departure from Gotham in 1879, Harvey's bitterness took an aim at his friend. The budding city official took Bruce's absence personally, though he would never admit it. Instead, he kept it bottled up. Harvey eventually met Gilda Beaumont. The two began a courtship, which led to their marriage. What was meant to be a joyful part of Harvey's life was still tainted by his bitterness boiling beneath the surface. Not even his acquisition of the position of county prosecutor truly brought him happiness. Gilda's marriage to Harvey Dent was an oppressive one. He was overly jealous, paranoid that she would leave him, and like his father, eventually began to turn to the drink. He would be calm and composed some days, and others he would fly into a rage about something or other. Gilda was afraid to leave him, as she felt that her presence was one of the few things helping the man whom she loved. This did not stop Harvey from being unfaithful to her, however. The young district attorney was known to frequent seedy clubs on occasion, all the while keeping it a secret from Gilda. He led a double life in his marriage, as well as in his social standing. To Gotham citizens, he was a paradigm of justice, but behind the scenes, many knew that he was merely another cog in Gotham's corruption. Whether or not he'd realised it, he'd fallen into the same trap as his father. Harvey was on a one-way trip to self-destruction by the time Bruce's reappearance in Gotham. Harvey still felt bitter towards his friend, but it was overshadowed by his joy and relief at seeing his old friend. The two rekindled their friendship. Harvey's drinking receded, and his visits to risque establishment ceased altogether, though he still did not come clean to Gilda about it. Bruce could see that Harvey was struggling, although his friend would not breathe a word of it to him. All Bruce could do was be there for him, and hope that was enough. Bruce and Harvey would frequent the Hawkins Club, an establishment owned by Bruce, as well as the Monarch Theatre. It was at the Monarch Theatre where Bruce first saw Selina Kyle after returning home, and Harvey first began to let his resentment to poison his friendship with the young Falconer. Harvey was enamoured with Miss Kyle, but she didn't see right through him, and she did not want anything to do with a married man. As Miss Kyle began to spend more and more time with him and Bruce, Harvey began to notice that Bruce was taking a liking to her, and she to him. It went as far as Bruce sneaking her into the men-only Hawkins Club with them. Harvey found himself enraged at both Miss Kyle and Bruce. The county prosecutor allowed resentment to poison his heart, and began to fall into his old habits. Selina Kyle even once mentioned that he was a regular Jekyll and Hyde, to which Bruce agreed. He's almost a different person when he has the drink in him. Harvey's resentment grew as he saw Bruce seeming to get everything he wanted: a glorious return to high society, a veritable fortune of inheritance, and the affections of Miss Kyle. He was a man spurned, and he continued to sink lower and lower. Soon, Gotham began to see horrendous murders plague its streets. Some claimed it was Jack the Ripper returned. Some claimed it was a mysterious Batman who was rumoured to roam the streets of Gotham. Harvey finally let his rage let loose in his particular instance. It had been building and building for years, made worse by the fact that he had no one he felt could confide in him. He was bored with his lot in life and saw an opportunity to bring a Bruce to his pedestal. He took it. He was one of the main reasons that Bruce was tried and convicted of the Jack the Ripper murders in Gotham. His two-faced nature was beginning to rear its ugly head.
Good evening, Mr. Fleck. I'm Agent Bullock with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I'll be conducting your interview today. So good to know the good commissioner is frittering away that mountain of tax dollars and outsourcing actual police work. Tell me, Agent, would you like to wait until after you've conducted the interview to beat the hell out of me? Or would you rather just get it out of the way? Believe me, I'm not like that. Then you are a typical Pinkerton indeed. I could be genuine. I could just want to help you. You wouldn't be the first. Most are quick to accept their preconceptions as fact, in the process ignoring those little bits of truth hiding just on the surface. For example, it is widely accepted you killed your victims to claim portions of their wealth. Moving on to the next, like a common parasite.
In the year 1890, Gotham saw a string of murders. Most of the victims were wealthy middle-aged women, and all were found dead with no signs of struggle. Police were stumped, but one thing they did know for sure, these women had not died of natural causes. All of them were found having multiple muscles in their face pulled back, in rifus sardonicus, otherwise known as rictus grins. This led the police to believe that the cause of death was poisoning by strychnine. After investigating and interviewing friends and family of the victims, police found a potential suspect, Jerome Fleck, the illegitimate son of Emily Fleck and a household manservant. The Flecks were a less prominent wealthy family in Gotham, but the scandal of Jerome's birth was the high talk of Gotham society. Jerome was raised in the wealth of the Fleck family, but due to his illegitimacy would not be privy to an inheritance. As the boy grew into adulthood, he became more and more resentful towards his mother and fathers, the one he knew and the one he didn't. He was by birth the black sheep in the family, but he also resisted any kindness or love they had to show for him, believing he was better than they were. Jerome had to believe he was better than they were. It was a better alternative than listening to all the taunts and bullying and jabs from his step-siblings. He learned to rely solely on himself. When he reached young adulthood, Jerome began to realise the limits of the wealth of the Fleck family. He lived with his mother and step-family and only had limited access to the family trust. He tried to discover his biological father's identity from his mother, but all he could find was he had become a drunk and a criminal after fleeing the Fleck estate. Eventually, she let slip that he lived on the outskirts of Gotham named Skin of End, a slum in the city. Regardless of his own investigations, Jerome was never able to find his father. Only reports of a petty criminal in a red hood who had been shot down by police in a botched robbery attempt. Because he was not an heir, Jerome found the need to accumulate wealth of his own. Growing up in high society, he knew of many older women who had lost their husbands to the Civil War or other traumas, and after he quietly befriended them, carrying on multiple affairs and clandestine friendships, he charmed gifts and money and other valuables from them, preying on the pity of the poor, illegitimate son of Emily Fleck. When he had taken all he could from them without it becoming sufficient, they would all be tragically found dead. Jerome had studied which poisons would be most accessible and also most effective, and he settled on strychnine as his weapon of choice. It wasn't until the third victim that the police began someone suspected of murdering these wealthy widows. They had incorrectly assumed that the first two deaths were suicide by poison, as suicide was falsely considered to be strictly a female malady in those days. After realising their mistake, the police took action under the authority of Commissioner Tolliver. Inspector James Gordon was charged with finding the perpetrator of these grisly murders. Commissioner Tolliver was running for mayor of Gotham and he wanted to deliver results in order to bolster his campaign. As a result, Gordon was also under a lot of pressure to catch the murderer. In Tolliver's mind, his reputation was everything, and this case would make or break his success in campaigning for mayor. Tolliver was rumoured to be corrupt, occasionally taking bribes from dubious sources. So Inspector Gordon had very few resources at his disposal, and he was considered an idealist by his colleagues. Some claim that Tolliver was out to get rid of Gordon. In spite of this, the inspector immediately got to work interviewing friends and family of the deceased woman. Gordon soon found a common thread, a name: Jerome Fleck. Fleck had been following the investigation in the papers and arrogantly assumed that the police wouldn't be able to discover him as the murderer. So when Inspector Gordon came knocking at his door, he allowed himself to be questioned, thinking he was still able to avoid the discovery of his crimes. The questioning did not go as well as Jerome thought it would, and when Inspector Gordon left, he found himself panicking. Thinking with the irrationality of a frightened animal, he turned to the thing that had solved all his problems thus far, the strychnine he had used on the widow. Instead of killing him, it caused his facial muscles to spasm into a rictus grin, damaging his facial nerves. He laid on his bedroom floor near death until discovered by a housemaid. He was immediately rushed to the hospital where the police and Inspector Gordon were soon able to confirm Jerome guilty. Once he was physically able, he went to trial for the 3 murders of the widow. The Gotham Gazette dubbed him the Merry Widower due to his ghastly appearance and the nature of the atrocities he committed. Deemed clinically insane, he was sent to Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane under the care of Dr. Hugo Strange. Strange was delighted to have such celebrity of an inmate of Jerome and even took his rehabilitation upon himself, conducting private sessions with the illegitimate son of Emily Fleck. No one knows how or why, but it was here, facing the horrors of the asylum, that Jerome Fleck died, and something much darker was born. Some attribute it to Strange's unconventional, even unethical methods, but whatever the case, Gotham would face many horrors at the hands of Jerome, or if he would better become known, the Joker. Whitechapel, 1888. This was a time of terror in England. It saw many murders committed by a serial killer known as Jack the Ripper. He left letters and notes behind for the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee and the police. Yes, there were suspects, but no one could ever guess his true identity. And then, as suddenly as the murders begun, they stopped. What had happened to Jack the Ripper, and more importantly, who was he? It wasn't until 1892, when the world got its answer, the Gotham City Police Department began to receive letters from Jack. He openly challenged the police, as well as the rumoured Batman, stating that he had already begun killing again. The reign of the Ripper marked a new terror in Gotham. Bruce Wayne, who had recently been tried and convicted for the Jack the Ripper murders in Gotham, was sentenced to hang. However, he later broke out of prison and donned the Batman costume once again to do battle against the Ripper. He realised that Selina Kyle and Commissioner Gordon needed their help at the Gotham World Fair. There, Gordon was found unconscious, having been knocked out, and Selina Kyle was nearly choked to death. After a long battle, the Batman finally beat Jack the Ripper and handcuffed him to a rail, which knocked off his hat, which caused him to reveal his identity. It was Jacob Packer. What had caused him the snap was when he told Bruce's mother of his love for her, and when Martha responded with laughter. This broke Jacob, and in the end he couldn't take it, because he heard the laugh everywhere he went, and he paid a man to assassinate Thomas Wayne. Unfortunately, both were killed. But no matter where he went, he would hear the laughter, which caused him to start killing people in London. The Batman couldn't believe it. He took off his mask and revealed to Jacob who he was. Jacob couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that the Batman was Bruce. However, Packer stood to his feet, holding eye contact with Bruce. He terrifyingly walked back slowly along the railing into the flames building around them. The Bat listened to the screams of Jacob Packer was burned alive, and the reign of the Ripper came to an end. With the passage in years came a bitterness to Bruce's view of the city he had fought so hard to protect. He would later defeat the Scarecrow, the Riddler, and he would take on the likes of Mr. Freeze and Basil Carlo once again. He later retired in 1912. By the time the First World War came around, he did not have the physical capacity to fight. However, he used his wealth to help influence the war. He would even train his eventual replacement, Terence McGinnis, but he died in 1953. Gotham still stands to this day and it will always remember the Batman. Over the centuries, he's become the inspiration for many urban legends and folklore. To some, he was a mythical being, to others a helping hand. But one thing we do know about him for sure, he brought justice to Gotham.